Gracias a todos. He preparado la presentación en inglés. Okay, I'm going to talk today about the work we do on adaptive management, or adaptive management in collaboration. It's a work we have been doing for the last 15, 20 years, which started when I realized during my PhD that after finishing a PhD on modeling aquatic vegetation for the management of the Doñana marshes, everything ended up in the shelf of the manager's office and very little was used. So since then, being in an institute of engineering, I started to think and to try to find ways in which the things we do are used in management. And this is a bit the approach we have been trying to follow. So what I will do is give you an introduction on how we approach adaptive management, what we think it is, and then I will show you an example of one of the projects that we are developing at the moment in the Estación. It's actually an institutional project, which is the project Adaptamed. So first I want to tell you a bit about our working framework, which is actually taken from people working mostly in Canada, United States, and the Anglo-Saxon world. It's called adaptive management, and I will discuss a bit what it is, why we think it can help decision-making and policy design, especially in complex issues like ecology, and how do we think it can contribute to, how we think a research project can contribute to adaptive management. So adaptive management, if you have seen it around, normally is defined with short phrases like it is learning by doing, so that we do what we learn and things like that. So basically it's a strategy to use the management process or the taking decisions process to learn from it and continuously improve then this decision making. It is not a process of trial and error. It's not just trying, seeing what happens and changing. It's not a process of adapting as you go. It's not a process of trying things and then seeing how they go and deciding how to improve it. It's a process in which you strategically design your management to learn from it. So the big difference is when you decide how you are going to take decisions, how you are going to manage, you plan everything to be able to learn. And this is an approach that has been ongoing starting from the US and Canada in the last 20 years, and is based on two things. Accepting complexity and uncertainty at face value, so accepting that the systems that we manage are complicated and are uncertain. It's difficult to know how they will respond. And accepting that management actions are always experiments. So accepting that even if you take the best decision you can, you don't know what will happen until you do it. And that's why the meme focuses on learn from doing. You don't wait until you have done experiments and experiments and experiments and you are 100% sure that you will do something and something happen. Instead, you accept that you have uncertainty, that you are not fully sure of what will happen, and then you plan your action to be able to slowly learn from it, trying to reach your goal and at the same time learn. That's the big difference. Now, this has been going around with different names. The American Society of Ecology has used it for many projects under the label ecosystem management. Projects focusing on ecological restoration and hydraulic management normally refer to it like adaptive management, and people from the social sciences and the governance schools normally they refer to it like adaptive governance. And for us the label is not the important thing. For us it's the approach that is the important thing. And little by little it has been incorporated into Europe. So in the last 5 to 10 years there has been, for example, incorporation into legislation like the coastal zone management in Europe. The directive refers explicitly to adaptive management. There have been a number of projects mostly on forest management and water management. Now, adaptive management is basically a systematic approach to improve resource management by learning from it. Adaptive management lays in the gray area between a huge focus on learning, such as in basic research, and a full focus on managing when you think you know everything, which is conventional management. So it's designed to be in this area where you don't know enough, but you have to do things. And learning plays a key role in adaptive management, but it's not a goal in itself. It's just a means to achieve better management. And that's very important to insist on researchers, because we have to remember constantly that we are trained in treating learning as a goal in itself. In adaptive management, learning is a goal to do better management. Okay, and when adaptive management is not always necessary, is not always good. When you have clear-cut questions, when you have clear-cut management actions, it is not the most adequate approach. It is the most adequate approach when, first, you have to take a real management decision. You have an opportunity to learn, so the system is complicated and uncertain enough that you have to learn. And the value of information for decision-making is high. So in many instances, the value of information is not worth the cost it has. So for adaptive management to be worth, the value of information has to have a real consequence on management. And it needs a number of things, and this is the things on which normally projects that label themselves as adaptive management fail. It needs a clear and measurable management objective that can be identified for the overall project, not pieces, but just an overall objective. It needs to be, well, it happens in a system that has uncertainty, but the uncertainty has to be expressible in explicit hypothesis. So you have to be able to make a hypothesis about how things could happen when you do your management actions. You need a good monitoring system that works normally in the long term. And that monitoring system has to be designed in a way that reduces uncertainty in the long term. You need long-term commitment, and you need decisions that can be reviewed in learning cycles so that actions are adjusted. And this is often not the case. So often adaptive management programs are set which have no explicit moments in which the decisions are reviewed. And of course it can be done in many different in many levels of complexity, and mainly the difference is how much emphasis is made in the participatory part, in the collaborative part, in how much the people, the stakeholders and the managers participate in the decisions and the whole institutional system learn from it. So it can be done in very simple setting when the decision is taken by very few people, and it can be done in very complex settings when you have many people involved and you want them to participate in the whole process. Okay, and why do we think that adaptive management is critical to do proper management? Our experience in decision-making and policy design is mostly at the operational level, so it's mostly on the management of small things, but we have participated also in the making of regional rules, national legislation, and European legislation. And we find a common pattern on why policies tend to fail. And the common pattern is, this is the typical decision tree policymakers and decision makers have. It goes from phase one, you identify and define the problem. Phase two is you identify alternative solutions and you choose the optimal solution. And part three is you implement the action and everything goes well. Now, all of you can think probably of many examples when this doesn't happen. The clearest one is our housing bubble, when the government made a number of actions to lower the price of houses. I don't know if you remember, and then at the end, the housing prices increased and increased, and the whole thing blew up, and now we are in an economic crisis since then. And this was a perfect example of taking the wrong decision and never reviewing it. And why these things tend to fail? because there is 3 assumptions here that often do not hold. The first one is that you have perfect technical information, or good enough for a perfect definition of the problem. The second is that you have sufficient stakeholder participation when the best solution is chosen. And on top of that, that there is a best solution in itself. And the third one is that you will have a stakeholder cooperation when you implement the action. And actually this follows from that. So the assumption is the technical analysis can find an optimal solution. Then you will inform the people and they will realize that because you have found the optimal solution, that's the best option. And because they have realized that, they will cooperate. Now, most often, that doesn't happen. And why it doesn't happen? Because there are a number of constraints on policy and decision making that prevent this. These constraints are mostly lack of knowledge, complexity, and uncertainty, especially on ecosystems, and that causes best solutions not to exist. Very often there is several different solutions which are good for different aspects of the problem you want to solve. On top of that, people have different points of view and they have conflicting interests. So instead of supporting the policies, many stakeholders will resist the policies. And the result is very often the policy have results that you didn't expect and plan for. And the reason for this is especially strong on ecosystems because they are complex, they are open, and when they are open, it means that when you analyze a problem in Doñana National Park, you have, for example, a species which have from very local to very broad distributions interacting in that spot, which means that the forces affecting your system go from local to regional scales. They are unstable and far from equilibrium, so very often the dynamics you have are having very strong historical effect on your actions, and there are disturbances that you can never plan for. So for example, you can do an experiment like the ones have been done in the last years, clearing up shrub vegetation to favor grass for rabbits. And if you make your intervention in a dry year or you make your intervention in a wet year, it makes a huge difference that carries on for many years. Because if you make your intervention, you have a dry year, you have overgrazing, and then you don't have any plans to recruit, you may have no effect, no positive effect of your intervention. If you're lucky and you make it on a wet year, you may have exactly the opposite effect. So these are the kind of things that make very difficult to predict how the things will react, and you can plan for, but if you don't plan for, you cannot even make conclusions on what is happening with your treatments. So the result is that there is uncertainty on both the objectives and the way to reach them, and there is unpredictability on how both the systems and the natural systems and the social systems are going to respond to actions. And this makes decision making very complicated. Now, how adaptive management approaches this problem? Well, it approaches by accepting that we have knowledge gaps and complexity and uncertainty, and treating policies as experiments, something all of you are very familiar with. So, basically treating policies as experiments means making use of the experiences researchers have so that they interact with policymakers in designing policies that treat different options. So later on, with the data from the monitoring, they can be selected based on how they were performing. But for that, you need to do one thing, because you are not acting on a lab with an experiment. You are acting on the real world, and people expect already that the things you do work. You cannot tell them, okay, in 10 years' time, I will provide jobs. For the time being, I'm doing experiments. So how do you do that? Okay, you have to try to select solutions which are robust, so they reach your goal, but the chances of screwing up are low. And you have to select solutions that at the same time facilitate learning based on monitoring. So then you have to really think hard in saying, okay, I reach my objective, at the same time I don't screw up, and at the same time I learn. And for that you use a battery of tools from decision making and from all the experience that people have on doing experiments. So how this happens, how this is done in practice? Is this feasible? Okay, there is a number of examples that show that this can work. Probably the best example was in Canada, when in the 80s they have a very strong pressure because the reputation was going down. Out of the way, they were cutting up natural forest. Basically, they were cutting up all the trees in the piece of land that was going for timber at a given moment. That was creating major problems for biodiversity, for soil erosion, for water quality. So there was huge pressure nationally. The image of the wood came down, and at the time there was at universities people already working on adaptive management for more than a decade. So the government told them, okay, how can we do this in practice? So what companies did is discuss how can we cut down trees and make the rotations to favor biodiversity. And then the solution was, okay, we will do different treatments that allow you to do your work. So basically you can cut down your parts and you will leave a proportion of trees. And then they were saying, but how we leave them? We leave big trees or small trees? We leave rows of trees or we leave islands of trees? We leave a mixture of large and small trees. And they say, okay, we design a number of treatments. In all of them, you know that what you lose is you have to leave 10 or 20% of the trees. And in each place, we randomize and you do it differently. We monitor and then we optimize. And that's what was called variable retention techniques. So there have been companies operating like this for the last 20 or 30 years. And the system is running, the companies are making profits, and the most interesting thing is when they did monitoring, there was also extensive discussion on what do we monitor. We monitor soil, but on biodiversity we monitor indicator species, we monitor all the species. But basically one of the most important results is that treatments are optimal for different aspects of the variables you are monitoring. So if you want to prevent soil erosion, some treatments are better. If you want to prevent water infiltration, if you want to enhance water infiltration and improve blue water, other treatments are optimal. If you want to protect endangered species, some are better than if you want to protect overall biodiversity. So one of the results is probably that the combination, and that comes very often in adaptive management, the combination of different treatments can provide you the optimal solution that you are looking for. And that combination with experience, you can tailor to the local goals and local characteristics of your ecosystems. What happens if you only have one dam, like in the Colorado River? You cannot do alternative treatments comparing dams. What the approach in the Colorado River, the problem they had is that the way the dams are managed normally, which is you increase sedimentation in the dam and then you have no sedimentation in the river, and every now and then you open in a way that most of the sediment goes away because that's what you want to clean the reservoir. That was disturbing all the Colorado River fisheries and ecosystems. So instead of, because they didn't have many different sites to do experiments, what they decided is to have a program over time in which they are doing the discharge in different ways and monitoring to see which ones are operating better. And they had a strong discussion group with all stakeholders to see which values each stakeholder was requiring from the river. Some fishermen wanted to have pebbles in some places for the fish to breed. Other people wanted to have high water levels so they could canoe. So they did, like, during 10 or 15 years, they have been doing a number of different experiments. And now with that data series, they can decide how to operate it best. And again, they were doing that, adjusting it to the main role of the dam, which was to produce hydropower. So essentially, is combining participation, experimenting, and decision making. There is another side to collaborative adaptive management, that is, different people have different interests, and if you don't take that into account when you take your decisions, very often they will resist your decision. So when you try to implement, then you discover that things don't work because people is doing the opposite that you expect from them. The way to approach that in adaptive management is to acknowledge that there is legitimate differences in viewpoints and conflicts of interest among stakeholders, and you try to create a place where they can be discussed and provide an objective reality on which to take decisions. And that's done through collaborative modeling and participatory decision making. Collaborative modeling, the main aspect is that experts provide openly their information so that it is freely shared by all stakeholders, and they trust then the consequences of the actions that are analyzed. So one of the main problems when researchers provide results to stakeholders is you say, okay, if you do this action, then you will damage ecosystem here, and if people have not participated in the process of generating that information, they simply don't trust it. So the idea here is that by doing the process together, people know where this information is coming from, and by discussing it openly, they trust more the results. So the role of expert judgment changes from being the objective reality that the policymaker takes to make decisions to democratizing discussions. By providing everybody with the information, everybody is suddenly on the same ground, on equal foot. That means that it's more likely that people understand the consequences of their actions. That means also that discussions change from defending position to discussing the performance of the different action, because you are giving validity to all positions. And that makes clear, or that makes more explicit, the difference between technical judgments, which is what can we expect if we do this, and value judgments. We want to have this or that. So basically that is separated, and of course value judgments will be there, will be on the table, and maybe decision makers will have to deal with that, but at least there will be a common ground concerning the technical judgments. Okay, so when you put this in practice, there are three main principles that researchers participating in adaptive management have to understand. And the three main principles are these. First, this is a manager's thing, manager's rule. We are trying to improve management decision making, but we are trying to help them. So scientists need to understand how their input fits in the way managers are taking decisions. If they don't understand that, if they don't understand the policy process, their contribution is often useless, which is what happened, I will say, in 90% of cases when scientists try to provide information to policymakers. Second, what is the aim of the whole exercise is learning to do things better. It's not creating models that are right, that you understand how all the things work and are perfect models. You want to do models that allow you to test hypotheses about the difference between what you expect to happen when you do management and what the outcomes you actually get and what is causing that. And third, this is all done to foster change in the way things are done. So if you do a perfect adaptive management project, but the management doesn't change, the project is not successful. So success is measured by how much learning you have fostered in the management part. So all in all, these methodologies, what they try to do is close in a faster way, the cycle between action and learning, between action and information. And why is this important? Because the world is changing so rapidly with global change that if we would do things in the classic way of researching, being sure of things, and then informing, then we will never be in time to respond to the changes we are facing. Okay, this is the framework we use. Question is now how we do that in practice in Spain in 2015, 2017. Now, the way we see things now is that in Europe, the thing is being uptaken very, very slowly. And we have the impression that the way of doing things in non-Anglo-Saxon Europe is very deductive instead of inductive. It means that people tend to think and then decide and do, while in the Anglo-Saxon world it's more like, okay, let's try things and then we select the one that works. So that makes it extra difficult to introduce adaptive management in our countries. And at the moment, given the commitment that you need from all parts to do all phases, we haven't succeeded to make any full adaptive management project that involves the whole decision making a couple of times. So what we are trying to do is to introduce change by showing things that work piece by piece, what we call a jigsaw approach, making the puzzle. So I will show you 3 projects we have that deal with pieces of the decision-making cycle. Decision-making cycle, is you evaluate things, you plan, you do, you evaluate the results, you plan, you do. So currently we have a European project, the Ecopotential project. Is focused on remote sensing tools for decision-making in protected areas. And for example, with this, we are trying to provide tools to evaluate in a fast way the success of management actions and plan your future actions. This doesn't involve the decision-making or the implementation of the actions, but at least we are trying to provide tools that allow stakeholders and managers to get information quickly from remote sensing images and take decisions with that. We are starting another project which is strongly related to this ecopotential. It's called GRACED, and it's focused on the management of herbivores in the park where there is overgrazing. Now, the focus in this project is to link the planning and doing action. And the idea is to provide information and tools that allow the managers every year to try to anticipate the primary production that the park will have, which changes a lot depending on how much it rains, and be able to adjust the stocking rates of cattle to that primary production. So in that case, we are trying to facilitate the link between planning and doing. And the project I will show you more in full today is the Life AdaptaMed project. It's a project that is an institutional project from the biological station, and is focused on the adaptive management of Mediterranean socio-ecosystems. And this project focuses on the doing and monitoring part. So it focuses on doing a number of things with an adaptive approach and monitoring how they work. And the thing that it has lacked is to do the design in a participatory manner, because in this case, life projects, when you apply for them, they ask you already what you will do. So you don't have room to say, okay, I will plan it with the stakeholders. So, okay, Life AdaptaMed is focused on ecosystem services that are threatened by climate change and on doing some adaptive management actions to improve their long-term sustainability. It's a project that takes place in Sierra Nevada, Almería, and Doñana. So it's a life project coordinated by the Consejería de Medio Ambiente with the participation of Doñana, University of Granada, University of Almería, and then for the divulgation part, IUCN, Parque de las Ciencias, and then it has even 2 sponsors, which are Lanjarón and Fombella. And at the biological station, the IP is actually Tim, who is here, and there is a number of researchers involved, Cristina Ramo, Carlos Ibáñez, myself, Guillaume, which is coordinating technically, and then there is a technician hired by the project, and it has being an institutional project, it has quite some support from the monitoring team and from the last. Okay, what is the project doing? It tries to mitigate the impact of climate change on ecosystem services in 3 places: Doñana, Cabo de Gata, and Sierra Nevada. And for that, it plans to do a number of adaptive management measures that support the provision of ecosystem services like soil and water retention, so soil fertility and soil water retention, pollination, primary production, carbon storage, biodiversity, and transfer these tools if they work to other places. And it exists with another goal, which is consolidating the Andalusian network of global change observatories, which is a network that the Andalusian government is pushing that aims at monitoring climate change or global change, in a number of nodes, which are currently Doñana, Sierra Nevada, Almería, Tarifa, and there is one that is going to be incorporated in Córdoba. So different types of ecosystems where global change can be monitored. So the idea is that this project will continue in the long term by having joint monitoring programs, joint adaptive management programs, and then hopefully more citizen participation. And which environmental problems it's addressing? Well, it's addressing the impact of climate change and other anthropogenic drivers on the structure and functioning of natural ecosystems. With these ecosystems are the shrubs and cork oak forest of Doñana, the Sisyphus shrubland in Almería, and the mountain juniper and oak forest in Sierra Nevada. I will explain you a bit later what we do here. There is a second package that focuses on addressing desertification and soil loss in Cabo de Gata. I will not mention this today. And there is a third package that focuses on the risk of decay and the limited resilience of pine afforestations in these parks. You know that one of the predictions of climate change is higher temperatures, lower precipitation, and that means that the density of forest may be too high to be resilient, to be sustainable. So one of the possible measures is to reduce this density and also diversify the vegetation so that when things change, the forests are already prepared. That is done with different pines in different places. That's one of the strong parts of the project, I think. Stone pine in Doñana, Aleppo pine in Cabo de Gata, 4 different pine species in Granada. Okay, so what do we do in practice? For the first measure, which is the one focusing on the impact of climate change and anthropogenic action on natural ecosystem, what we will do in Doñana is to try to increase the resilience of the shrubland and cork oak forest to climate change in 2 ways. First one will be finding out which individuals of cork oak have Phytophthora and treating them. So that's a survey and a treatment that's coordinated by Cristina Ramo. The second measure is to do a number of management measures that are already used by the park to enhance the recruitment of canopy species in the shrubland, mostly cork oak, wild olive, and mastic tree. This is Quercus suber, Olea europea, and Pistacia lentiscus. And how do we do that? Okay, the main problem for the recruitment of these species is, on the one hand, overgrazing, and perhaps, and that's discussed whether it's for all the species, the lowering of the groundwater table that makes it extra hard for the seedlings to survive the first couple of summers. So the treatments will be a factorial combination of exclusions of cattle and wild ungulates, so fenced areas, nursing structures. This is what they call here entaramados. It's a structure of branches of pine that have been pruned and that protect the seedling during the early stages, preventing that the herbivores feed on them, and also provides a good environment, a more humid environment. And planting and sowing seeds and saplings to address the fact that in some places the adult individuals are very far and seeds are not reaching the place. And how do we do this? Okay, you can see here that instead of doing an intervention in a given place, which is what traditional forest managers will do, take a given area and do everything there, the adaptive approach consists in having a number of replicate sites in which the treatments are applied factorially. So there will be three treatments applied in Manecorro, 3 in Los Sotos, 3 in La Algaida. And in each of the 3 sites, we have identified homogeneous vegetation, and the 3 sites differ slightly on the type of shrub you have. You know, those of you who have been in Matas Gordas know this is what they call a dehesa with Quercus suber and a lot of shrub species. But in this area, this was plucked by the owners some years ago with deep plugs to try to grow their grass. And the fact is that they have killed all the forest, and there's basically hardly any shrub or tree growing there. This is next to the Vera. This is the Vera in Los Sotos. You have mostly what we call here Monte Blanco, and this is a mixture of Monte Blanco and Monte Negro. So it's the different stages of the shrub vegetation in places where the oak forest will be nearby or should be able to grow. So what will be done there is this design. In each of these plots, there will be 2 plots fenced, 2 plots open. So this is to see whether simply by excluding the cattle we can enhance the recovery of the shrub vegetation. In 4 of these places there will be sowing of seeds in this band in the periphery and planting of young plants in the center. And 2 out of these 4 will have this cover of branches protecting the seeds. And seeds will be a mixture of alcornoque, acebuche, and lentisco, and they will be actually planted in lines at 1 meter distance, and in each place 2,500 seeds will be planted. So basically this is almost management scale planting. So, and what are these entaramados? Okay, this was designed. So I didn't participate in the initial design of the project, but basically all these actions are actions that the managers have been doing for the last 10 years, but they have never been monitored or cross-factorially. And those are structures that are created with the branches of trees. Normally they are used to provide breeding areas for the rabbit, but people in the park and in the station think that they can be also nursing structures facilitating the recovery of the vegetation, so they want to test this dual role. Now, the second action focuses on stone pine afforestations. You know, most of the surrounding of the park and part of the national park have a very extensive stone pine forests, which have been facilitated by men or planted. And there will be basically 3 measures. One will be creating different densities of pine forest to see whether at lower densities we can enhance the diversity of the vegetation under it and the ecosystem functions under it, including carbon storage. The second one will be try to enhance the recruitment of these subcanopy species. Basically, this is the same than in the previous action. And the third one will be trying to enhance the abundance of insectivores by putting nest boxes. Again, you can see here we have a factorial design. The park worked quite hard in finding homogeneous places of pine in the Avalario area. And in each of these places, we will have 3 plots of 7 hectares, and in each of these plots, a different treatment will be applied. So we have one area which are pines from a reforestation in 1940. Those are very big trees, but they have a low density, about 100, 150 pines per hectare, while in the other 2 areas, those are reforestations made in the 1990s when the eucalyptus were pulled out. And here, the density is more than double, 300 to 400 trees per hectare. This kind of gathers the whole diversity of situations we have in Avalario. And what will be done is reducing the initial density by 30% and 60%. And I depicted it because actually forests engineers planning this were pushing quite hard to not to remove so many trees, because for them this is almost not any longer a forest, a pine forest. But basically we had to insist strongly that the approach here is, on the one hand, to have a more diverse type of forest, and on the other, create a situation that if you really lower water availability, the forest will be still sustainable, and trying to measure what is the optimal situation, even for the growth of pine trees and the accumulation of carbon. And the strong case we were making is that maybe you're right and this is too much, but if we don't monitor it, we will never know. So, and within each of these plots of 7 hectares, there are 9 plots. We will again create 4 treatments, which is an open control. This is a fence plot in which this is 1 hectare each, so like 2 football fields, where no herbivores enter. And then in all of them, there will be these plantations of saplings and seeds of these 3 species of shrub. And in one case, we will do this extra protection with the entaramados that try to provide local protection against herbivores. So this is not a factorial design because there were economic costs involved, but it's a design that will allow us to test the efficiency of the different measures. This is all now ongoing. This will be done in autumn, and before that and during that, or after the intervention is done, the key issue here is to do monitoring on different ecosystem functions and see how they work. And I just will conclude telling you what we are measuring. So we are currently measuring changes in vegetation cover, both in shrubs and pastures. We are planning to measure every year all the variables that forest engineers measure in forests, so the size of the size of the individual trees, the distance between trees, and the quality of the canopy, so whether it's attacked by different plagues and these kind of things. So the idea is to be able to estimate carbon stocking in the long term. And we are measuring the soil fauna. This is the 3 most important variables. We are also planning to measure seed dispersal by mammals, because we think it's important for the regeneration of the undergrowth canopy. Community structure of micromammals, soil parameters, recruitment of all the things that are being planted, and changes in phenology of the vegetation. These are a number of things that mainly focus on biodiversity and things that may influence the success of the intervention. And lastly, we will measure pollinator abundance, butterflies, and breeding birds. So we are measuring a number of variables that are functional, mostly related to water and soil fertility, and in situ variables describing biodiversity. And on top of that, the group of Almeria is measuring, by remote sensing, measuring forest variables. And this is what we are doing. So basically, I just wanted to show you one thing, which is, this is still an experimental project, but the main message I want to convey is that every day managers are doing experiments at a scale that we cannot never pay. And at the same time, because they are not designing and monitoring them properly, they are not learning from them. So if we succeed to do this kind of work with people doing management, we will be able to do experiments. We will never be able to do, especially in Spain, because we cannot afford the money to do it, and they will be able to learn from the things they do. So it's a win-win situation. So I just want to encourage everybody to try to use these approaches and design their experiments with intervention in practice instead of doing them in the lab or in the field as a lab. And I know it has been a bit long, but thanks for your attention.